What's up, guys? It is Sam here, and I wanted to talk a little bit about Tesla and what is going on and how I use that to open more positions on Tesla for my trading in Robinhood. So I wanted to go over all of the details of that. By the way, before I get into it, this is not financial advice. Like, you should fucking figure your own shit out, just like I'm doing, but don't even slightly think that I'm trying to give you advice on what to do with your money. This is how I am choosing to use some of my money. I don't want anybody to think that they should do something that I'm doing just because I'm doing it. Does not seem like a wise decision to make. Okay, so with that, Tesla, yeah, what's up? Okay, there is a lot of short interest on, well, basically I'm going to tell you what's going on with the stock price and the news and everything like that, and then tell you how I am taking advantage of that in the market with my positions using options. So I think this is kind of cool. What is happening right now with Tesla is it appears that it's going through a short squeeze. So I wanted to tell you what a short squeeze is when you short a stock. And then I wanted to go through and walk you through the story of what is actually happening so that you can see the same logic or thought process I'm using to open up the positions I am opening up to hopefully make some money on Tesla. Okay. So there's a tremendous amount of Tesla that is shorted, and I'm going to give you some numbers right now because Tesla is around $40 billion. That means if you took all of the shares of Tesla and you multiply that times the number of shares outstanding, that would be the market capitalization. So theoretically, like, that's what somebody would pay for them. However, like, clearly that would never happen in reality because if you took the share price times the number of shares outstanding and multiplied it out, if that is $10 billion, why would anybody pay $10 billion for that, right? Like, I wouldn't sell for less. So if you actually look at M&A activity, these companies are going to sell at a premium. I don't remember exactly what the empirical evidence is, but I feel like it's in the double digits. I feel like 17% comes out interest in my mind. So, anyways, that's a complete fucking tangent. So there's a tremendous amount of shorts. So say they're about $40 billion. There's about 10 or $11 billion of short interest on Tesla. So that means of that, right? Like 25% of the company is shorted. Now you're like, Sam, that's good to know. That doesn't mean anything. I don't know what fucking shorting means. Well, that's what I'm about to show you, bro. Okay. So when you short a stock, we're gonna just use Tesla here. So we've got Tesla. That's their ticker symbol at currently $225 and change, but we're just going to go with this, right? $225 per share. Now, what happens when you sell a share of stock, or when you short a share of stock, is you sell it. So if I'm like, hey, bro, I want to short a stock. Well, what that means is, and by bro, I mean brokerage, I would take a share of Tesla stock from my broker, and I would sell it. So I would get $225 per share. And you could use this to, with the thought process that if Tesla goes down, I will make money. So I think Tesla will go down and I will make money. So this is why somebody would open a position like that. This is not what I am doing. So how does that work? Okay. So now I have $225, right? I had one share I borrowed from somebody that I'm going to have to pay them back, right? Now, think of this as in the sense of like somebody's car. Okay, you borrow somebody's car, and it's a 1-year-old car, right? And it has 15,000 miles on it, and it's depreciated substantially over that 1 year. And it gets into a car accident, and then you have to get it replaced. Well, the new version of that car costs more. So think about this, right? That was a very poor analogy. Say the price goes down to $200 per share. Now, my broker says, hey, bro, I want my share back, right? My client is going to sell their shares. So at this point, I would go into the market and purchase one share of Tesla stock for $200. And I purchased it here, this is the market, and I would take that share and I would give it to the broker over here. Here's your share for $200, sir. And now my broker is like, oh, thanks, bro. I really appreciate you giving me that share back. And that other share you owed me is all settled. You're like, what? Well, because they didn't borrow money, they borrowed a share. So the share price changes, and you just give that back. So the broker, generally they'll charge an interest, but we're not going to get into the broker charging the interest and how you'd calculate the returns on that. This is just very simple. Okay, so now that's in the case that the price does go down, right? Now, what happens in reverse, right? So say the price goes to, say, $235 per share. So what happens at that point? Well, again, go to the market, purchase one share for $235, but I only have $225. So I have to put more money in to buy that because I have 225 shares and I need 235. So I need to add money and I lose money in that case. Right? I lose the delta between those two, which is $10. So, and I'm getting to a short squeeze. I know you're about to ask me, what is a short squeeze, Cam? Get to the fucking point. Well, I'm getting there. You have to tell the context of the story, dude. Okay. Now, what is a short squeeze? I was just about to get into it. Okay. So now, what a short squeeze is, these are generally going to be positions held by hedge funds, right? And just to give you some idea, I'm only going to talk about 10,000 shares. Now, hedge funds can be small, right? Or they can be substantial. Think Bridgewater, right? They're like, I don't know, you know what I mean? They're at like 0.15 trillion dollars. Like, you know what I mean? There's a substantial amount of variability between the smallest and the largest. So we're just going to figure 10,000 shares here. Okay. It's a very small hedge fund. And here's an example again. We take the share, $225 a share, and we sell it short. So we'll be like, hey, broker, hey, can I have 10,000 shares? Broker's like, sure, no problem, bro. He gives us those shares. We take them, and we sell them in the market for $225 because that is what it is currently at. And that gives us $2.25 million. Millis, right? I'm going to do an MM for, yep. I don't know why I did that, but this MM means $2.25 million. Now, we'll go through this same thing here again, and then I have to touch on leverage. I'm getting to the point, though. So if the price were to drop to 200, then we would essentially make the difference between these two by taking this $2.25 million and purchasing 10,000 shares to give back to our broker at a share price of $200. And we would make the delta between this and this. Basically the $250,000, right? That seems pretty nice, right? Especially if you could do that over the course of like a month to make $250,000. So that seems maybe very appealing to some people and yet very scary to others. However, there's something called leverage, and in this case, let's just consider a 1 to 2 leverage, which means that this $1.225 million I would have to have in an account to be able to settle, right? Like, I didn't have this money, so if Tesla stock went down to zero, I would have to buy back the shares at zero, which means that I would lose. Or I would get, it would the opposite of that. Basically, if the price went, say, from 225 to 325, I could lose all that. So I have to have an account to be able to settle this, right? So you need something to be, you're not just going to loan somebody $1 million without something behind it, right? Like a house or some way to protect yourself. And that's what the brokerage do. They're like, hey, well, we need $2.25 million in order for you to open up this position, because what if the price goes up? And, one of the things that is allowed, though, is leverage. Think about if you buy a house and you put down 25% down and you leverage, or you take a loan out on 75,000 or 75%. That is the same exact thing. But we're just going to consider a 1-to-2 ratio here, meaning that for this position, instead of putting $2.25 million in the brokerage firm to cover my position if it were to turn horribly against me, I only have to put 1.125, I think it is. And 1.1 million. So what ends up happening is there's a opportunity to earn higher returns, but in this case, there's also something which is called the short squeeze, which happens when you go the other direction. I'm still almost there. I'm not quite there yet. That was a little premature in terms of calling it a short squeeze yet. So now you have to understand, if we talked about closing the position, but what if you wanted to leave it open, right? So you would leave this open if you were losing $10 a share. So you also have to now consider what the broker is going to tell you to do, right? So if you were at this, right, and you weren't using any leverage, and you lost $10 per share times 10,000 shares, or $100,000, you would have to add another $100,000 to this position, right? Which might not be bad, right? If you have $2.25 million. But having $100,000 liquid sitting around might be challenging for some people, even in that neighborhood of money that I'm talking about. So we'll just take a look at both of those sides in a second. But if you look at this as a percentage, $100,000 on this is a very small amount, right? That is, I don't fucking know, 10%. It's not fucking much. Right? So we have 2.25, or 0.1 divided by 2.25. That's under 5%. It's 4.44%. So, but if you do it on this other number where you're using a lot of leverage here, it is 1.25. It is double, right? So you have it's 8%. So basically that's showing the amplification effect from or the percentage of additional funds that you would have to put in if the price were to change, which makes sense, right? Because you have a 2-to-1 ratio here. So at that level, we have to consider two things, right? If it goes up, as I mentioned, by now this is where it really gets into the short squeeze. So now if it goes up by that $10, maybe I will decide that I will add that $100,000. Or if I was the person that was leveraged, maybe I would add half of that, right? Because if I was keeping the same leverage at 1-to-2, I would add half of that, or $50,000, to my account to be able to keep that position open without the broker closing it on me at any point. But let's consider that marginal person. That marginal person will be the person who sold it short at $200 a share, and at this point they need to put up another $250,000, and they either do not have the capital, and we'll talk about what happens, or they have the capital and they don't fucking want to lose any more money. So clearly, if they have no appetite to lose more money, then they would close out the position, meaning they would lose that $250,000, right? Which is just the delta, because they'll get something back. So they'll lose $250,000. Now, if it is leveraged 2-to-1, then that portfolio is completely wiped out, right? Because you have 1.125 million, and now you're only at like you're at $250,000 less than that. So like at 0.8, $800,000. Like your portfolio is significantly impacted. And that person decides to buy their broker, right? Like if they don't have the money to put back into there because they don't have it, their broker will close out their account. And so what happens when there's a supply and demand and somebody is purchasing, right? If there's more demand, the price goes up, right? Fucking simple economics. So if the price is going up, then what happens to the next marginal person? They have those two options, right? They can lose more money potentially, or take their loss, or the don't have the money and the broker has to close out the position, right? And this all takes place around, there's a little bit of a tangent here on the complete and utter disparity between reality and what the legacy antiquated views or like style of producing the news, like CNN or CBS or MSNBC or any of these organizations, or a lot of the like Wall Street Journal and Reuters and The Street and a lot of these players, right, Barron's and stuff, have an agenda that has every, or I would say probably 4 to 5 to 1, in terms of negative articles versus positive articles. And if there's any type of news where a normal, this is somebody like that, they're just fucking making the average in the United States, right? Like the per capita income in the United States is like $35,000 or $40,000. This person is that average. They're just fucking real average. And they hear it from the source, Tesla, and then they hear it from one of these legacy players that I just mentioned for media outlets like CNBC or CBS or MSNBC. Tell that what they heard here. And they're clearly on different fucking planets. It's like playing telephone, the game where you talk into somebody's ear and this person tells this person, this tells this person, and this, they just go along until you get all the way around. And it's whispering so nobody else can hear. And the story starts out as I want an orange, and it finishes up as there is black sheep in the driveway. Like a completely utter different story than what it actually is. And that is what's happening with these media players versus like the news you can go listen to and hear about Tesla on YouTube, on Electric, on all these very focused EV type news outlets, and it's a completely different story. That is the reality of what's happening, and this other stuff is not there. So what ends up happening to the stock price? Getting to Sam, get to the fucking point. So when you have a bunch of negative information coming out through the news, right? These news outlets still have some type of nostalgic value to, I'm going to say older, but I don't necessarily mean age. I mean in terms of thinking of how things used to be when reality, that's like not where it actually is, right? Like reality's fucking different than it was 20 years ago when these players actually mattered. Now there's zero fucking relevance or very little relevance to these players. So there is some type of value. I'm probably being harsh, but it's drastically less than it was 20 years ago. Like substantial, you know what I mean? If it had like a 30 or 60% impact, like, or in terms of necessity, it's like less than half. Yeah, it's probably like a fraction of that. Anyways, so this news comes out, and that negative news drives the price down. And what happens when there's not a lot of news around Tesla is that these media outlets on YouTube and channels and other websites that are specifically covering topics related to Tesla and battery technology and autonomy and all of this stuff cover this in far more objective viewpoints than what is told on these like ancient ways of thinking about communicating called like these media players. Like, it's two different fucking worlds. So when there's no news coming out around Tesla, these modern players actually, some of their information starts to more take over of what's like the realm of the sentiment essentially of that's happening in the ecosystem of the world around Tesla. If that kind of makes sense, think of like the essence of Tesla in the fucking world, and there's a lot more of that positive essence or like sentiment around Tesla. So what happens is these old players are not telling stories anymore, and that reality is actually starting to, like, people are noticing more of it. So the stock price goes up because they're like, wow, the media says that Tesla's about to go bankrupt, but really demand is off the fucking charts. Like, they are destroying the competition. There's not even, it's like a fucking car versus a fucking bicycle to get around. It's just tremendous. The impact that they're having on the auto industry in general. Like, I think a fourth quarter of 2017 versus fourth quarter of 2018, and like having 100% growth, or maybe it was Q1 in 2018 versus Q1 in 2019, like having I think it was like 120% growth in units delivered. Like, that's insane. Think about that. Like, think about what other automaker is growing at 100% year over year in units delivered. And you're like, well,